Hey, welcome to the Wildscast. I have with me Dumisani Washington, who's an extraordinary personality. And welcome, Dumisani. I really appreciate you coming on.
Rabbi, thanks for having me on, sir.
Honor and a pleasure. Before we get into the issues, anti-Semitism, anti-Israel sentiment, all the stuff we're going to talk about, I want to give our audience a sense of who you are, what you do. You founded the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. Tell us what that's about. Tell us what you're about and what inspired you to create this organization.
Well, the organization was founded in 2013. I founded it shortly after my very first trip to Israel, which was in December 2012. I was a guest pastor as part of Christians United for Israel. I was not on staff at the time. I did serve later on, but I was not on staff, had gone there. And Israel and Africa had always been passions of mine from the time I was young. So that part of the story had already begun. But there at the Western Wall, those two passions kind of converged, if you will. And I had a deep sense of doing the work that we're doing now. I had a real strong sense, as I talk about in my book, Zionism in the Black Church. I can only describe it as something that a very deeply moving spiritual experience for me. And and there was this need to strengthen the ties between the Black and Jewish community and between Africa and Israel. They were always combined. They were never separate issues. And so I returned to the States. By the summer of 2013, I had started the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. And a few months later, the next year, I published the first edition of my book, Zionism in the Black Church.
Wow. And what does the organization do? I mean, what are your main goals that you're trying to accomplish through the work of Black Solidarity with Israel?
Well, part of that story, Rabbi, that I just shared has to do with not just obviously my personal journey,
Mm-hmm.
but one that I call a spiritual legacy. There is a deep bond between the Black and Jewish community in the United States that goes back over a century. And then often we often talk about in our organization that the beginning of the Africa-Israel relationship was when the Queen of Sheba visited King Solomon in Jerusalem 3,000 years ago. That was the first Africa-Israel summit, as we say. We don't believe that those things are happenstance. We don't think that those things are coincidence, right? It's prophesied about David in Psalm 68, verse 31, and princes shall come out of Mitzrayim, Cush shall stretch your hands to God, right? We don't believe those things are there for no reason whatsoever. And they had
Agreed, by the way.
yeah. So and that's part of our thing. So and we're not, although obviously I'm a pastor, as you a rabbi. And so, but our organization is not religious, but obviously there is a scriptural underpinning to what we do, meaning that we recognize legacy. So when we talk about legacy, we're talking about a Black Jewish synergy in the States now that has changed the course of this nation several times and the world, right? Before Dr. King was even born, and he and Joshua Heschel connected, and during the civil rights movement, as Dr. King said, that the Jewish people were overrepresented as an ethnic group within the Negro struggle for justice, as he called it. Before he was even born, there was Julius Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington, right?
Mm-hmm.
Millions of Black and former slaves and second generation who had really no access to education. They were free, quote unquote, but really had no opportunities except for those that they forged for economic uplift, for education. And what does Booker T. Washington do and Julius Rosenwald? As you know, that synergy winds up building over 5,000 schools throughout the segregated South and other areas. Rosenwald schools, some of which still stand today, right? It changed the course of the nation, not just of the Black community, but what was going to happen with millions of uneducated former slaves who did not have the opportunity to really begin to claim their spot as Americans. What was going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
God only knows, right? But again, there was this synergy that was there. And again, we believe that our communities continue to find each other for some very, very deep and profound reasons. And so that's much of what we do. Ours is a strengthening of that, but not just obviously in terms of religious circles, geopolitically, talking about why Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East and the greatest friend to Africa there. There's been struggles, there's been difficulties there, absolutely. But when you're talking about from the time of Golda Meir, the first foreign minister, whom Julius Nyerere of Tanzania called the mother of Africa, right? With all of the things that Israel would do now for decades throughout the region and around the world. I was just reading an article today about how Save a Child's Heart has just now operated, I believe, on 4 kids from South Sudan, right?
Oh,
They've
yeah,
been doing
it's a
that for the last
beautiful. I've been to that organization. They're incredible.
It's funny. I've been to Israel multiple times. I haven't gone yet. We'll be there again in June. So, hey, Save a Child's Heart, if you're listening, we're coming to you.
It's gonna, it'll lift your spirits. It's incredible.